Now tell me, Brooklyn, when did you last see your son?
Oh, about 20 years ago, Father. He was about 4 years old, little kid.
Well, we have invited him here tonight.
No.
Yes.
The Benny Hill Show had an enormous influence on the world for over 30 years and was broadcast in 97 different countries. The show had 31 million viewers in 1971 alone. The show's episodes featured a multitude of visual humor, technical tricks, and subtle elements within them that many viewers were not aware of when they saw the episodes. I want to share with you several of the finer details that have somehow been missed since the first airing of The Benny Hill Show. It was I who was giving him those loving smacks throughout the show. But what if this harmless-looking joke was hiding a deeper, rule-breaking trick that quietly rewired how audiences perceived reality? The screen wraparound running gag. The Benny Hill Show included a variety of creative visual tricks. However, there were a few tricks that were done so often that viewers accepted them as standard comedy tropes. One of those tricks was the use of the wraparound effect, in which a performer runs off the left side of the screen and then immediately runs back onto the right side of the screen as if the screen is wrapped around the television. Rather than being the result of bad editing or an error, Hill revived this gag from the silent film and cartoon traditions on purpose, because it gave viewers the impression that the world the performers lived in was a cyclical universe where space folds in upon itself. The wraparound effect became most well known during the chase scenes of Yakety Sax. However, astute viewers could find examples of this gag in everyday sketches as well, wherein a performer could run off the left side of the door and then run back through a completely different door on the right side, disregarding all spatial continuity rules. Hill was essentially using the same type of video game physics that became commonplace decades later. The gag was so effective because the audience would be laughing before they could recognize the impossibility. Viewers would simply watch the absurd visuals and continue laughing. Hill utilized this gag continuously within any given 30-minute episode, often repeating the gag 5 to 15 times, so he could eventually wear out a person's ability to question the gag, allowing them to watch a chase scene without interruption. But what if I told you Hill had another secret trick to make these chases even crazier? Curious? The undercranking frame rate trick. Most people associate the Benny Hill Show with its frantic chase scene set to silly music, not realizing that it was achieved in camera using an undercranking technique, that is, shooting at a slower frame rate, 18 to 21 frames per second instead of the standard 24 frames per second. This caused a rapid playback of frames when played back at the normal speed, which created an almost cartoonish appearance for the actors as they were running away from their pursuers. It is interesting to note that undercranking originated in the silent film era, where camera operators constantly turned the camera manually. Even if I had used some other example of how fast the chase scenes occurred, by using the camera technique of undercranking, you could create the same frantic look, regardless of speed. The original slapstick comedies by the Keystone Cops were a huge influence on Benny Hill, who loved those movies and subsequently embraced the technique of undercranking. Most audience members never realized why the action was different. They simply sensed that something humorous was occurring. Hill even varied the speed within the same shot. For example, he taped some actors at slow speeds and others at regular speed. Although a few tricks were hidden in the editing process or in the cinematography, others were lurking in the background. But what if some of those fleeting, unnoticed moments on screen actually hid the earliest glimpses of future superstars? Cameos by future celebrities. There were a number of performers in the Benny Hill Show's regular cast, most of whom eventually catapulted to overwhelming international fame. However, when audiences first watched the show, they had no idea they would become stars. Jane Leeves is an example of this. She joined the cast as one of the Hill's Angels in the early 1980s, but later gained worldwide fame for her role as Daphne Moon on the American sitcom Frasier. When she was in Hill's Angels, she was just one of many dancers in the background performing choreographed routines. Most viewers paid very little attention to these dancers, as their focus was directed toward all the antics of Hill. The show has since created a modern-day treasure hunt for viewers. Now they can see the many familiar faces of today who were on the show and may not have even been recognized as future stars at the time. Benny Hill was able to employ hundreds of extras, choreographed dancers, and various bit players throughout the life of the show, and while performing as extras, many of these early extras were struggling actors willing to take any job they could find. By studying the performances of today on the show and closely examining the performances of these unknowns, it is now possible to recognize and discover many future stars who had been part of the show at its inception. On occasion, Hill did occasionally allow already successful performers to make cameo appearances on the show. Musical guests on the show were clearly indicated as being on the show. The performers who appeared for only one episode and received their considerable salary from Hill will always remain unknown until they have their own success elsewhere. But what if some of these unnoticed performers weren't just background stars? What secrets did their fleeting mistakes reveal on camera? Bloopers accidentally kept in. Although The Benny Hill Show always depicted itself as a professionally produced TV show, it did have some real mistakes that happened to make it onto the show. These were not simply staged blooper reel type of gags. These were genuine errors that slipped past quality control. Attentive viewers of the show would often see things like crew members reflected in mirrors, shadows of crew members showing up where they should not have been, and props failing at the worst possible moments. Since Hill preferred to shoot all scenes in just one take, most of these mistakes became permanent parts of the sketches. One very common type of stray blooper was when the background extras or secondary performers broke character. For example, during large musical numbers or chase scenes, secondary performers would frequently stop moving, stare directly into the camera, or suddenly react to something happening off-camera. Due to the typically fast-paced environment that The Benny Hill Show continued to create, with dozens of people working together, almost no flawless takes were possible when filming. Rather than filming any expensive sequences because of minor mistakes made by the background performers, the show editors simply determined that the audience was most likely going to be too focused on the foreground of the action to notice these minor background errors. Prop mishaps presented another source of raw, unpolished disasters. Doors getting stuck, signs falling over too soon, or costume components coming undone. Sometimes, those mistakes furthered the comedic impact. Trouble getting ingested by a prop tiger was only funny because its costume piece, a tiger head, had come undone. Now and then, Hill incorporated those mishaps into his own performance, incorporating those mishaps into his reactions as if certain accidents were part of his comedic playbook. But what if some hidden details went unnoticed by viewers entirely, adding layers of humor only the keenest eyes caught? The wall graffiti conversations. Every episode of The Benny Hill Show had walls of graffiti that told stories. Graffiti artists created fake conversations on the walls in a Q&A format. In each episode, show producers included them as part of a joke script to keep them hidden from most viewers, who focused more on the action than the wall signs. An example is in one of Hill's sketches, when Marie, who plays a waitress, goes into a restaurant and orders a champagne. Another example is the joke that asks, "Why do bees hum?" followed by the punchline that reads, "Because they don't know the lyrics." One wall has a question that asks, "What is the difference between a good girl and trash?" followed by, "Trash comes out once per week," and finally, "Not here." The majority of these graffiti conversations took place during sketches with outdoor chases where viewers could see them for only a moment as characters dashed by. Hill took inspiration from silent movie title cards to use the walls in this manner, basically turning static background elements into moving storytelling elements. In this way, the jokes on the walls were separate from the sketches, but they contributed to the development of the comedic atmosphere, creating a world of humor that filled every bit of space. Most people who were lucky enough to see the first airing of the show never took the time to read any of the jokes written on the walls. Later home video and streaming releases revealed how densely packed with comedy each frame actually was. But what if the comedy didn't stop at sight alone? Could Hill's music be hiding jokes too, unnoticed by everyone? Hidden music within Yakety Sax. Those who are familiar with The Benny Hill Show will automatically recall Yakety Sax, which is used as a frenetic opening theme for all chases. The fact is that few people are even aware that Yakety Sax is not one catchy melody, but a masterful cut-up job that has incorporated snatches of recognizable melodies so seamlessly that even regular listeners are unaware of their existence. The piece samples chicken reel, which is a traditional American folk song, while even a couple of bars from Entrance of the Gladiators, better known as a clown entrance march, are sneaked into the musical collage. These were originally incorporated from the beginning. James Spider Rich wrote the Yakety Sax piece in 1963 specifically as part of an event in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. When Ronnie Aldrich eventually covered the tracks featuring the tune from the Benny Hill Show edition, he made sure not to remove these subtle elements. Just as the carnival tune bursts forth during the chaotic pursuit scenes to finesse the sense of pandemonium, the clips of the chicken reel add a carnival-like colloquial feel to some of the sketches. Most of them didn't recognize anything. They just heard this fun, familiar-sounding tune and didn't know why it connected with them on such an emotional level. In fact, Peter Hughes's fantastic sax was much stronger than the underlying reason for this hidden effect was. The song's hidden potency was based on tunes that the audience subconsciously recognized. The partially concealed sign, gags. Benny Hill used clever visual techniques that involved signs that changed meaning when partially hidden through the use of different props. For example, one time, Hill was beside a sign that read, "Homes for Rent," at which time many attractive women walked through the front door of a building. After they were done, a single woman slapped Hill. Until that moment, it wasn't apparent to the viewer that a flap on the sign would reveal the sign now read, "Homes Toilet," the French word for men's restroom. The joke worked because viewers couldn't see the change in the sign during the sketch. These partially hidden label bits appeared frequently on the show. They tended to either sit in the background while the foreground actions took place, or swing from doorways into view. That is, Finest Antiques becoming something entirely different. So people focusing their attention on faces and action missed such background changes. Genius is all about timing. As I have pointed out in this article, when you see the prop or sign in question after the punchline, you should have already noticed it for several seconds prior. If someone were to pay attention to everything around them through being very observant, they would probably know when these characters were going to deliver their punchlines. Nonetheless, the physical comedy in Hill's routine was so engaging that very few people have managed to do it. It would not have worked, however, if British audiences were not familiar with reading non-verbal communication, which made this visual pun very natural. The poster board's first letter code. The effect of these large poster boards placed beside doors and the clever use of innocent sentence structure to create hidden talent acts on Benny Hill was one of his best running joke gags. In each gag, once the poster board was in place next to the door, there were 6 or 7 sentences stacked vertically on the signs. Whenever Hill performed a gag close to the sign, he would swing the door open and block the rest of the text from the viewer's sight, revealing only the first letter of each sentence in the stack. The first letters of all the sentences stacked vertically on each sign formed an inappropriate word that created the punchline to the gag. The audience would first see a legitimate sign or notice and would have no idea there was anything more to it than what they had just read. The production of these gags required an immense amount of planning to ensure that the grammar of each of the sentences was perfect, and the letters spelling out the intended words were the correct starting letters for the sentences. Some examples of these sentences are, "Can you believe me?" "Really unbelievable," and possibly never conceal anything different. Each sign needed to be placed in an exact position to block just the right amount of text. The idea of visual wordplay existed dozens of times throughout the series, but most viewers only caught the reference after the door had opened. These gags happened so quickly. The door opened, flashed briefly, and then closed, that most people would not recognize that it had happened until the skit was finished. Only the subconscious was aware of the obscene word before the gag continued. Fred Scuttle's backwards salute. One of Benny Hill's most iconic recurring characters was Fred Scuttle. Fred appeared in many of Benny's sketches wearing wire-rimmed granny glasses, and he wore a military-style cap sideways on top of his head. Most fans of the sketches did not pay attention to or notice Fred's silly salute. However, many military fans of Benny Hill would have noticed that Fred always saluted with his open palm facing forward, which is the exact opposite of British military protocol. The salute of the British Army requires the palm to be facing inwards towards the temple, not away from it towards the viewer, as the American salute does. Fred Scuttle's backward salute was a choice made by Benny Hill to help define Scuttle as a character with good intentions who was simply confused or an accidental fool. Fred's incorrect salute appeared in every single one of Fred Scuttle's sketches for over 15 years, from his introduction to his last appearance in the series. Hill stuck with this consistency religiously, realizing that such details, no matter how trivial, are what create recognition and trust with an audience. The slanted hat added a further dimension to the joke. Fred Scuttle's military turnout was utterly wrong in every respect. He wore no insignia and no crest. He had no badges and no buttons. His boots were not polished. His tunic was a light civilian color, yet he wore it with absolute confidence. His trademark entry involved stumbling or tripping along behind the interviewer, usually Henry McGee, and then popping into that distinctive wrong salute. Jackie Wright's head tap response pattern. Jackie Wright, the bald man from Ireland who was one of the most popular characters on The Benny Hill Show, received numerous head smacks from Benny Hill while performing in the program. As the underlying joke was repeated, one example of Jackie Wright's always accurate reaction would be whenever Benny tapped on Wright's bald head, or a helmet Wright might have worn, Wright would immediately stop what he was doing and say in his distinct Irish brogue, "Stop dancing up there." The exact phrase appeared in several different episodes in various sketches. The most well-known sketch was the "You aren't allowed on my launching pad," where Jackie was wearing a standard helmet when Benny drummed on it. In the same way, during the Scuttle space race sketch from the Murder on the Orient Express episode, where Wright is in a glass, fishbowl-style helmet, Wright delivered the exact same line in that sketch as well. The repetition escalated into a sort of in-joke among keen watchers, which hinted at a possible connection among Jackie Wright's numerous comedy characters, indicating that perhaps all of them were one bemused chap all the time. Of course, few people picked up on the repeated action, but few people noticed anything out of the ordinary in the verbal reaction accompanying it either. This was actually Jackie Wright's trademark, which added to, instead of detracting from, the bodily humor, and it was a minor point proven in a show so irreverently zany. The room number rotation gag. Benny Hill employed a very consistent and yet surprising device to demonstrate how easily one can make mistakes while entering another person's apartment room. The setup for the routine would be similar. An individual would vault into a hotel apartment room only to find a couple in bed, realize they were in the wrong apartment, and then react to this realization as though they were just embarrassed. Usually, the embarrassment required a quick glance outside the door at the room number on the way out. The most effective part of this gag was that the audience had no difficulty understanding what happened, even without any music or dialogue. The same prop that provided the gag developed the entire series of sketches, where there were slight alterations in each sketch/episode. They were called rotate a number plates and provided an effective method for creating this funny routine. Hill's production company created the rotating number plates to assist in creating the prank. Typically, all number plates are permanently affixed to a door. The gag was funny because the audience recognized the essential elements, the wrong apartment or rotation of the number, without any dialogue. They understood that the individual in the sketch was in the wrong apartment because they made a mistake and were embarrassed to leave. What was missing from the viewer's experience was the fact that this exact same joke occurred with a recurring frequency throughout various episodes and situations. Sometimes it was Hill who was the stranger, and other times it was other members of the established cast. The locations varied between hotel rooms and apartment complexes and office high-rises, but the ever-rotating number stayed the same. Bob Todd's whiskey that was always juice. Bob Todd is one of the tall, dignified regulars from The Benny Hill Show and is well known for hilariously portraying inebriated characters. In scenario after scenario, Todd appears very tipsy as he lumbers about carrying a bottle of whiskey and taking huge gulps of what appears to be true whiskey. If you examine these bottles closely, though, you will notice that the contents are too light and/or clear to be actual whiskey. In addition, if you observe these scenes in slow motion or as a close-up, it's apparent that the liquid in these bottles is orange or apple juice rather than whiskey. Nor is it even a substitute for whiskey, such as the tea that various film sets use. The giveaway becomes even more obvious when Todd pours his drink into a glass. Because the color and texture of Todd's drink are indistinguishable from graphics with fruits, you may also notice that Todd's drink occasionally contains pieces of pulp. All of this really did not matter to Bob Todd because he was completely and earnestly committed to his persona in all of his performances. This is the 12th occasion this year, and it's no later than January 4th. His stumble, his slurring, and his drunken swagger were so good that the audience never doubted the drink. The brains of the audience automatically connected the blank. There were also production-related reasons for the change in beverage choice. These scenes normally required multiple takes, and it was not safe for any actor to take multiple doses of actual alcohol. Tea would stain teeth and change in color when exposed to light in the studio environment, but apple or orange juice was perfect in front of the camera and was safe for consumption. The fishbowl helmet goldfish joke. During a themed interview about space visuals on the Fred Scuttle series hosted by Hill, Jackie Wright appeared inside an enormous glass fishbowl that had been used as a helmet. The show's straight man, a comedian called Henry McGee, asked the most obvious question, can he breathe while in that thing? Fred answered with what turned out to be one of the series' greatest dark comedy routes, but delivered the line in such an offhand manner that the majority of the audience thought he was just telling a regular joke. Fred answered happily, saying, "I would think so, sir. My goldfish stayed alive in it for approximately 3 weeks." The humor of this line operated on 2 different levels. People watching the incident on the surface would take the answer literally. After all, humans and fish need different forms of survival. However, the deeper humor lies in the past tense, stayed, which indicates that the goldfish was dead. Essentially, Fred Scuttle was saying that as part of the safety testing they had to use to develop the fishbowl helmet, they had first killed a goldfish, and 3 weeks was some sort of acceptable length of time to wait before the goldfish died. The dark humor of Scuttle's line was completely missed due to the bright and matter-of-fact delivery by Hill, but this was one of the trademarks of the show: dark hints and messages delivered in a cheerful, comedic way. The fishbowl gag was also effective on a visual level in that the confusion on Jackie Wright's face was accentuated by the distorted view of him through the thick glass. Hill's split-screen self-conversations. Benny Hill became well known for switching back and forth between successive characters in a sketch. Among his best works were the sketches in which he was sometimes depicted as 2 or 3 versions of himself in one scene. Using split-screen photography with incredibly detailed planning, Hill was able to create seamless conversations with himself, making many people believe he had a twin or alternate on the set with him. This illusion required complete precision, beginning with filming one version of the scene while leaving empty space to allow the second version to come in, and finally waiting until all the film was completed to join those 2 pieces together using an optical printer or other means. Hill's convincing representations of both characters included a dramatically altered voice, body position, and expression, leading to maximum focus from the audience on the character differences. Flat spaces on the floor would also have been covered up to create horizontal separation or to allow for the placement of furniture, which is why people did not question how both versions of Hill could have occupied the same physical space. The something else also rises, visual metaphor sequences. Rather than presenting romantic interaction explicitly, the Benny Hill Show relied on sly visual hints in the form of various image-type metaphors. If a sketch started to get near intimacy, it used symbolic images, be it a washing machine going crazy, a rocket being launched, fireworks going off, or another metaphor for sexual or intimate connections. As these rapid series of images were used as a substitute for the censoring nature of television, the audience quickly learned to understand them without much thought about them being used in a dirty way. The use of images in TV shows, the use of waves to represent intimacy or a door closing, was not invented by Hill, as Hollywood made similar attempts using waves crashing or closing doors, etc. However, he used montages faster, funnier, and more exaggerated than anyone had ever attempted before, with trains diving into tunnels, for example, with pistons pumping and champagne corks flying away. Each successive gag built upon the next, increasing the amount of exaggerated symbolic inference. What most viewers missed was that Hill put a lot of effort into the creation of each shot, suggesting how the tempo or build-up of the images helped to create the emotional and comedic beat of the scene. Even if viewers forgot a certain image or were unable to remember it, the final sequence conveyed a clear rhythm of emotion and humor. The chase scene direction reversal. Benny Hill is often remembered as a comedy actor who chased scantily clad women around parks and streets. But a closer look at the actual scenes shows that in most cases, where he was seen being chased, he was actually being chased by people he had angered or offended. In fact, in all but a handful of scenes where he did the chasing, he was the hapless victim fleeing from people angry at him, an irate husband, or even women angry because of something he did. The public's perception of what happened was reversed because promo material and highlight reels promoted the most controversial images of Benny Hill chasing women. From incomplete episodes, it was evident that he was always the victim of some innocent blunder or misunderstanding, and that he was running away for his life from all of the people he had upset. The people involved in the chase included cops, chefs, nurses, elderly women with umbrellas, and sometimes the Hills Angels. But most of the time it was because Benny Hill had caused trouble, and not because he was trying to romantically pursue the women. The common trope involved Hill as a well-meaning everyman who, through his own ineptness, sparks community resentment. He could inadvertently smash a wedding cake, offend a mobster's spouse, or cause a chain car accident because of his clumsiness. The chase scene featured everybody fleeing from him, not in his wake. This one aspect alone flips the gender dynamics of the TV series entirely. Henry McGee's double duty detail. As the gentlemanly straight man on The Benny Hill Show, Henry McGee hosted 45 episodes, during which he was the polite interviewer who provided Hill with setup lines with logical support. He performed the Fred Scuttle interviews, played authority figures, and helped to ground numerous sketches with his dignified presence on the screen. However, what most viewers of the show did not realize is that Henry McGee has also provided the audio signature for the show's most popular soundbite. The announcement at the top of the show, "Yes, it's the Benny Hill Show," came directly from McGee and not from a different announcer, as many thought. The ability to have a dual role in this way has remained hidden from viewers because of the way McGee used such different pitches and energies when he was the announcer than when he played his role as the straight man in sketches or interviews. In his sketch or interview work, McGee would speak with a measured, refined tone. For his announcer role, he would let loose with a loud, enthusiastic voice that sounded like a completely different performer. The show never focused on this link, never depicting McGee in an announcer's booth or ever attributing his voice work directly to McGee. The character worked as the narrator from 1969 until 1989, opening each show with his catchphrase before appearing in the studio as an actual character. Thank you for watching. Feel free to tell us in the comments section which hidden detail surprised you the most, and don't forget to subscribe.